And the Newsmaker show continues now with Alfred University Political Science Professor Emeritus Dr. Robert A. Heineman. As always, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for the invite, Brian.
Dr. Bob, Joe Biden's VP, who will it be?
Well, I think that's a point we want to put in a larger perspective here. At this point, Mr. Biden isn't appearing in public to any great extent, and he has himself kind of a dilemma in terms of what is he going to campaign on. Is he going to go campaign on the fact that he feels that President Trump is a very mean, nasty guy? And in that respect, I think people have already pretty much made up their mind what they think about Donald Trump. On the other hand, attacking him on this COVID-19 efforts, I think, is probably a losing effort on his part, too. So he's in kind of really a bind, and he seems to have kind of pulled out of this whole campaign effort. But the VP choice is one item that he can hang out there in kind of tantalizing fashion, raising questions about, who will it be? And you could play that out for quite a long period of time. Pictures of him with Elizabeth Warren, with Amy Klobuchar, a whole variety of people, and of course attempts to get Michelle Obama into the picture. And it is true, I think, that the Democrats really desperately have to have a big turnout among the black voters in this country. And without somebody like Michelle Obama, that's going to be very hard to do. On the other hand, I think Valerie Jarrett, day before yesterday, made it plain that she thought that there's no way Michelle Obama was interested in being a VP to Joe Biden. I think that's probably true. So it does allow Biden to kind of keep press interest and give the press something to talk about. And so I think if I'm Joe Biden, I'll drag this out for quite a while. But I think you also have to understand, and we made this point before, is that the presidential nominee does not pick the VP candidate. Now, typically, he has a lot of say in who that VP candidate is going to be, but the convention picks the candidate. And I'm not certain, but what the 770 some superdelegates can come in and vote on the VP right from the beginning. In which case, it's hard to tell, frankly, who might end up VP. And so that area is, I think, really wide open. And given Mr. Biden's qualities there as a candidate, obviously whoever the vice presidential candidate is going to be is really pretty important to a lot of people. Now, I do understand, and maybe you're aware of this, Brian.
Yeah.
Is the governor going to cancel the Democratic presidential primary in New York State?
Word is from progressive groups that the governor is postponing a decision on what he's going to do because of the pressure that the progressive groups say that they put on him.
I see. So they want the presidential primary delayed? Is that the idea or what?
Here's the email. Mass voter outrage prompts postponement of decision to cancel New York State's presidential primary.
So they're saying he can't cancel the presidential primary, that he can postpone it. In other words, they don't want it canceled.
That's what it appears.
Yeah. Well, I can understand that. And the problem with canceling it is that you get some of these Democrat candidates running, and for example, you get the special election in the 27th Congressional District. By putting all those elections together, it gives the Democrat candidate for that seat, this should be a pretty hefty Democrat turnout. But, if you don't have a presidential primary, then I think the Democrat turnout's going to drop way off. So it's a question of people farther down the ballot, I think, that comes into play there, and that may be why some of those progressive groups are not too happy with the possibility that he would simply cancel it. So I guess we'll have to wait and see how that plays out.
Another thing we got to see how it plays out, Dr. Bob, is North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and his health. Rumors is he's more than very sick.
Yeah, I get the impression, too, that the feeling is that he's on death's door there. And who knows exactly why. But it's quite possible whoever succeeds him will be worse than he is. Although that's going to be pretty hard to pull off. But I do think something we should watch here in North Korea is the effects of something like the COVID-19 on the North Korean population. My view of the North Korean population is that they are really in pretty bad shape health-wise. If you look at some of these border guards that a few years ago escaped across the 38th parallel, and these are the border guards for North Korea. I mean, they were really physical wrecks, filled with internal parasites, skin and bones. So I think it may well be that the North Korean population is very vulnerable to this kind of virus, and I don't think they have any kind of health facilities capable of dealing with it. So you might get some serious, a serious 1-2 blow there in North Korea here shortly.
Have an article pulled up online here that says experts say North Korea's reluctance to admit major outbreaks of COVID-19 is because of a sensitivity to any potential threat to Kim Jong-un's rule, and they're handling the COVID-19 pandemic in the same way, being very cautious on what they say.
Yeah. No, I think there are some signs there that Mr. Kim Jong-un's regime may be in serious trouble, and that would be a very good thing, Brian, a very good thing, yes.
Dr. Bob, President Trump made a, I don't know if I want to call it controversial, I don't know how much pushback there's been, but he made a statement about Iranians harassing U.S. warships. What do you make of that?
Well, I think the Iranians are heading for another wrapping of the knuckles here, or another nosebleed. We've already killed one of their major generals there. And what they've been doing, apparently, in the Persian Gulf is harassing some of our major warships, wheeling around in front of them and up next to them and that sort of thing. And that's not a smart thing to do. And I guess Trump has made it clear that if the commanders in the area feel in any way threatened, they've got the right to blow these guys right out of the water.
Yeah, Trump says shoot down and destroy any Iranian boats that harass U.S. ships.
Right.
Headlines on that from Al Jazeera. Iran promises to crush U.S. forces if ships are attacked in the Gulf. From the Military Times, after conflicting public statements, it's not clear whether U.S. ships will start shooting at Iranian ships if. Dr. Bob, there's no time where you want that kind of thing to happen in the Middle East with these ships. But now with this COVID situation is definitely not the time for that to happen.
Well, I think what the Trump administration is letting these other countries know is don't take advantage of us while we're dealing with this pandemic. And I think some of the Russians as well have been doing a little harassing on their part. So if the Iranians don't get the message here, what does it take to explain to them that when he says we're going to blow them out of the water, we'll do that. Now, apparently, according to the military command, it's up to the individual commander of his ship, whether he feels harassed and whether he feels the need to take action. But obviously Trump is giving him some leeway there.
Different media outlets said that the Pentagon kind of played down or watered down Trump's threat against Iran. What do you make of that move from the Pentagon?
Well, I think the Pentagon wants to make their own decisions on things like that, and they don't want the idea that they don't want Trump building a situation where we do end up in some sort of large-scale military confrontation, and because they are the ones that have to pick up the pieces. So I think they're trying to be pretty cautious. And sometimes our president, as you know, Brian, isn't all that cautious.
On the topic of the Middle East, the Saudis, looks like they have plenty of petroleum they want to get rid of, Dr. Bob.
Yes, I think they've pumped up production there to the point where the price of oil is way, way, way down, and I think maybe at historic lows. And so my understanding is that Trump's view is we got all this oil available at very low prices. We'll be happy to buy it. I guess his view is some cases they're willing to pay us to take it and build up our oil reserves. So the possibilities for the United States to exploit this situation, I think, are pretty good. Now, the other side of it is at the gas pump, of course, gas prices dropping. I think yesterday, in Hornell, I paid less than $2 a gallon, and I think considerably less than $2 a gallon for gasoline, which has got to be a kind of stimulating effect on the economy, what's left of it. And if the economy begins to get rolling again with a huge supply of oil in terms of airlines and other kinds of transportation, it seems to me that would certainly cut a lot of the cost of a lot of these things and stimulate the flow of goods. So there may be a bright side to all that.
I'm reading from CNBC from yesterday. CNBC says the IMF's projected these barrels of oil coming in from the Saudis would cost $76 a barrel. The
idea, I think, as this all started was that the Saudis were going to bring the Russians to heel on the production and price of oil. But the problem is for the Saudis is that, as that article indicates, they've got to have a certain price for that oil. And they're only good for, in terms of their cash reserves and such, I think for 2 or 3 years at the most. They've got to be able to sell oil. Whereas the Russians, although oil is, I think, something like a third of their exports, they've got other exports that they can make. And their economy, I think, is more diversified and, frankly, on more solid ground. So I think the Saudis, I don't know what they thought they were doing here, but they've, I think, poked the Russian bear there at the wrong time, the wrong spot.
As long as we're doing the international scene right now, Dr. Bob, question, and this is a listener question. Will India or Vietnam replace China as a trade partner, as a lot of people in the U.S. Right now are very irritated with China?
Yeah, I can understand that. Certainly I would expect that there's a lot more potential with the Vietnamese. They're very industrious, bright people, and I think they're more eager to get involved more trade with the United States, and certainly India the same. In terms of, however, competing with the Chinese, the whole Indian economic infrastructure, I think, is far more diversified and far less unified than the Chinese, because the Chinese are under basically a dictatorship, whereas in India you've got a whole range of democratic parties and ideologies, as well as diversified economic approaches. So But the Indians are very bright. There's no two ways about it. So I think they certainly are capable of providing more produce, and I think, frankly, the Trump administration will be encouraging that. And the fact is, I mean, they don't have to replace China, but if they start taking 5-10% of the difference from the Chinese, that hurts the Chinese economy quite a bit.
There's been numerous articles and talking heads who have mentioned that the U.S. has a great dependency on China for medical supplies. Do you see that changing in the future, Dr. Bob?
Absolutely. I think a lot of those things are going to change. In fact, I can see, and again, it depends on whether Trump is reelected, but if Trump were reelected, I think you're going to see legislation and government action stepping in there and basically slowing down considerably investment in China. The problem is, of course, people like Biden and others are tied into a lot of Chinese efforts. And so you're going to find people at the highest levels, kind of dragging their feet on this. But knowing Trump, he's not going to drag his feet at all. I mean, so the Chinese are going to come around, or we're going to find other trading partners, which just makes good sense anyway.
Talking to Alfred University political science professor emeritus Dr. Rob Heineman. Moving on to a domestic issue. U.S. Senate Republican Majority Leader Mitch McConnell made a statement about not being bothered about the idea of states going bankrupt. He was in favor of that. A lot of pushback against that, including from Congressman Tom Reed, who sent out a statement about that on Thursday night. Reed says the Problem Solvers Caucus could not be more opposed to what Mitch McConnell said there. Your thoughts, Dr. Bob?
Yeah, well, I think Reed's right. I just don't understand what Mitch is thinking there. I guess one of the things he's reacting to is, of course, the feeling that they got to get even more money from the feds. And this latest effort here, if I'm not mistaken, does not pour much money into the states and local governments. This is something, of course, that irritates Governor Cuomo no end. And he has criticized both Gillibrand and Schumer for not bringing home more bacon out of those two pieces of legislation. And because he wants more direct aid to the states and the local governments. The local governments in New York State should be preparing for, and I think they are preparing for, some really heavy hits in terms of state funding, because obviously the state budget is going to be pretty sparse this time around, and so people are going to have to take up the slack will be the local governments, the school districts, and places like that. And we'll just have to see how that plays out, but I think the localities are going to get a real squeeze out of this. It's looking pretty ugly across the board.
Dr. Bob, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is pushing back against criticism from the Washington Republicans that she was responsible for the Paycheck Protection Program running out of money, and that she's responsible for the delay in getting money to small businesses. Nancy Pelosi says she wants to correct that record because nothing is further from the truth. Then you have both the Democrats and the Republicans blaming each other for the stimulus money on this COVID crisis, getting a lot of freebies for places like the Kennedy Center. And Dr. Bob, both sides have accused the other side of sticking in unnecessary grants for their buddies and lots of freebies and lots of great giveaways. What do you make of that all? Who's right in this one?
Business as usual at the national level. And given that kind of money, nobody can get their heads around $1 trillion. So there's so much money in there that there are bound to be all kinds of patronage efforts and things of that sort. And that's kind of sad, but in terms of getting it through Congress, that's how you have to kind of buy the votes. And I think Pelosi is responsible for holding that up in the House. Not entirely, but certainly I don't think she was very helpful there.
Dr. Bob, there's been a lot of blame game stuff going on, too, with the whole coronavirus situation. You have the liberal talking heads saying that Trump could have stopped the whole thing a long time ago and did not act. You have the conservative talking heads saying that Trump was the one who restricted the immigration coming in from China, and that they also go as far as to say that pulling up old Dr. Fauci quotes, saying that Dr. Fauci was not worried about this back in January and February. What do you make of all that?
Well, I think it's unfortunate, but you're going to expect the Democrats to try to play somehow that Trump is at fault. The first thing to do is get this thing under control. And then the Democrats want to... I mean, it's clearly easy to say, well, they could have done better, or they could have done this, or they could have done that. But I think at the end of the developments here in terms of policy, the question will be, have we got this thing under control? And if we do, then I think the Trump administration is in a position to come right back with pretty clear statements of what was done, how it was done. But it's always possible to argue that this should have been done or that should have been done. You don't know what would have happened with the what-ifs approach. Well, the only thing we can deal with here is what has been done, and if that's reasonably successful, I think the Democrats are hurting themselves by trying to argue that somehow they would have done a better job. But I guess they're looking around for something to argue about. So.
Dr. Bob, this is my last point. Biden and Pelosi keep using the word science in their arguments. So they keep saying, I would trust science, and we need to trust science, implying that Trump does not trust science. What do you make of that argument?
Well, I think the problem with this is what's science and what's not. And having worked in the public policy area for a long time and dealt with the efforts of scientists and social scientists and such to come up with models, these things are really quite mixed in their effectiveness. And in this particular instance, you got a whole range of models here, as you know, predicting all sorts of widespread death, etc. And the problem is they don't know they don't have any data really. There's very little data available, and so Trump knows this, and so he's more concerned with basically how many ventilators do you need, how many test kits do you need, and that's the direction he's going to go, and leaving it up to the governors, given their state situation, how to play this out. But the problem with these rational models is that they are basically rationally based, and people are not rational, and so that's why I think they miss a lot of basic behavior there that is kind of hard to call scientific.
People are not rational with that. We have to go, Dr. Bob. As always, good having you on.
Well, I hope they're rational enough to listen once in a while. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
Okay. Right.